And so the challenge is more about how do we use our thinking. Now, for those of you who know the book, Do Good Design, you may recognize this guy. This is Eric Spiekerman, who wrote the foreword to the book. It's Eric Spiekerman's birthday today. So I wanted to say a big happy birthday, Eric. Except he's sleeping, because he's in Germany. But we could tweet it. If someone would tweet, happy birthday, Eric, I'd appreciate that. Eric redesigned the Deutsche Bahn system, which is the German railway system, and he redesigned the identity. And of course, he did a beautiful job with colors and all. But what I love the most about it is this. He thinned the letters. And by thinning the letters, they use less ink and less paint when they paint the trains. And when he painted the trains in the first year, they saved 125,000 euros just in paint. So this is a typographic decision which saves paint without aesthetics. And this more than paid for Mr. Spiekerman's fee for the whole job of redesigning the railway system. However, when it comes to sustainable design, this is my all-time favorite example. This is a bookcase designed by a UK designer, a friend of mine named William Warren. And it's a bookcase, and you can build it yourself out of whatever wood is close to your home. But the beauty of this bookcase is that when you die, you get to reassemble the pieces into your own coffin, which is impressive. Not only is it true cradle-to-cradle design, but you're also living with your own legacy. You're living with your own mortality. Every day, you look at this bookcase and know, I know exactly where I'm going to end up. Return to the earth. And I assure you, you'll spend a lot longer dead than alive. Which is why the legacy we leave in our lives is so much more important than what we do during our lives. And if we want to leave a legacy of designers that we can truly be proud of, we really need to take better care of the earth. Now, to live nothing but sustainably is rather impossible. And I'm not asking you to do that. But what I would like you to do is find one thing you're really passionate about and make sure that the opportunity and skill that comes to you as a designer, that you take that idea and embrace it. So for me, ever since I was about 3 years old, I have loved tigers. I slept with tigers, I had tiger posters. All of my projects in school were about tigers, the anatomy of a tiger, the history of the tiger. And so when I grew up, though, I learned this horrible thing. And what it is that I learned that 80% of the tigers that were alive when I was born are dead. That is to say, the world population of tigers is only 20% of what it was when I was born. Now here in Indonesia, 100 years ago there were 3 species of tigers, and now there's only 1. So just in the 100 years we've lost 2/3 of the species of tigers in Indonesia. And that makes me want to cry. And I don't want to die without there being any tigers in the world. I want to die with there being more tigers. So I've embraced this, and I sought out this temple in Thailand where I can learn to live with tigers, and we're working on a communication strategy to create more habitat for tigers. So I can use my skills as a designer to help the tigers. And maybe your passion is architecture, or maybe your passion is religion, or maybe your passion is family. Whatever it is, whatever really makes you tick, I ask that you find something that's good for the world and spend some of your time doing it. The thing is that it's easy to just see design as something that a little world where we create a special little perfect environment. And I remember when I started as a designer, that's how I saw it. I would stay up all night. I'm a typographer, and I would arrange letters in ways that I thought were brilliant. But I was denying the fact that there was a big world out there with lots of problems, and that design is life and death. In fact, what I'm showing you here on the screen here is the most influential piece of graphic design in my lifetime. I'm not sure if you recognize it, but it's the election ballot from the year 2000 in the United States of America, where George W. Bush became president. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but the election was very, very, very close. And in fact, his competitor, Al Gore, actually got more votes. But because the way the country is divided up, the whole election came down to one part of Florida. And in this one part of Florida, this is what the ballot looked like. The ballots the Americans use are not as good as the ballots used in Indonesian elections. They're confusing. And so if you wanted to vote for George Bush, you had to put a pin in this hole way up here. If you wanted to vote for the Democratic Party, which was the competitor, you had to put a pin not in the next hole, but in the third hole. If you put a pin in the second hole, you actually were accidentally voting for you were accidentally voting for this gentleman way over here, Mr. Pat Buchanan. He's an ultra-religious Christian who himself admitted that there was no way that 50,000 people in this part of Florida wanted to vote for him. And the election was decided by only 3,000 votes. And the result of this horrible piece of graphic design, which caused 50,000 people to vote incorrectly, meant that the wrong person became president. And it meant that there was a war in Iraq. And it meant that condoms weren't sent to Africa for 8 years. And it meant that the Americans never signed the Kyoto Accord. There's so many things that happened that affected our lives because of this one horrible piece of graphic design. Now, you think the Americans, especially how strongly they feel about how good their democracy is, would have learned a lesson from this. So they have elections every 4 years. And so in 2004, they had a chance to get it right again. But instead, they were using an equally horrible ballot. This is the same year that you in Indonesia had your first direct presidential elections with a brilliant ballot design that had pictures of the candidates. You had the same ballot for the whole country. In the United States, they still have a different ballot design in every part of the country. Hundreds of different designs, most of them horrible, like this one. Let me show you how it works. Now George Bush, he was running again to get re-elected. But he was running against John Kerry. Now, if you wanted to vote for John Kerry, you marked this little rectangle way up there, the 6, you filled it in. And if you wanted to vote for George Bush, you had to look for the number 4, and then go way up there, and mark that up there. It's crazy. And the reason for this is because this part of the country is controlled by Democratic politicians. So there's a lot of, it's not really a fair election. So in 2010, now that the United States has an Indonesian president, the American equivalent of ADGI created a new ballot design that actually made sense. But unfortunately, only 6 states out of 50 chose to use it. So we have a lot to teach the Americans about how to run an election. And we have a lot of examples of how design is life and death. This is an example, this is a picture taken by Ayep in Jakarta the other day. And it shows the classic green and red lights that are traffic lights. The thing is that in Indonesia, over 10% of the male population, over 10% of men in Indonesia have color blindness to some degree. And as well, so this is what it looks like if you're colorblind. It gets worse at night. Here's a picture of the same idea. This is a picture I took in Helsinki in Finland. And this is what it looks like if you can see color. But here, if I take the color away, it's almost impossible to tell if you can stop or go. And the reality is that in Indonesia, the largest cause of accidental death is traffic accidents. So here's a case where poor design is costing lives. Now, in Canada, we have this new idea we're testing where the traffic lights are redesigned. In Canada, we're using these lights where if it's red, there's 2 lights. And the red lights are square. So we also use color, green and red, but we're using 3 different cues, color and shape and how many there are, to give these cues. And what we find is that not just the colorblind people like this, everyone finds them more useful. And this is the case usually when we design for people with disabilities, that everyone benefits. When we would design for the extremes, everyone has a better experience. Now in Canada, the number of accidental deaths is now dropping, even though we have more and more drivers on the roads. In fact, designing for disabilities is an area that I specialize in. And this technology is something that I love because this girl is using a piece of equipment that's used by paraplegics. A paraplegic is a person who has no use of their arms or their legs or their neck down. But she's able to surf the internet, and the way she does it is that by turning her head, it's like moving a mouse around, and then by sipping and puffing on the straw, she's like clicking the mouse. So she goes moving and click, click, click. And in this way, she's able to access the internet. And indeed, over the last 30 years, all sorts of technologies have arisen where we use on the internet or not on the internet ways where people who were not able to participate in our society now can. In fact, more people have been made free, have been liberated in the last 35 years through technology than all the liberations from all the wars and revolutions in all of human history. And that's something we can be proud of. Indeed, technology, I think, is our biggest opportunity to make a better world. Because we live in a time where I come from, most people are on the internet. But here in Indonesia, only 20% of people are on the internet. And if you look at it worldwide, it's about 31% of people are on the internet. And yet in the last 5 years, we've seen amazing developments like Twitter and Facebook didn't even exist 5 years ago, and yet they've changed how we live. And so what I'm so excited about is the decade we live in now. This decade is the decade where the world is going to change, where the majority of humans will be on the internet. And so I'm excited to find out, when the majority of humans are on the internet, what will they invent? What will we invent? If this is what the minority can come up with, imagine how fantastic it's going to be in 10 years. But it's only going to happen if we have a truly free internet where everyone has access. Because there's a problem if what's called the digital divide continues. Does anyone know what the digital divide is? Have you heard this term? Digital divide? Anyone? Is the clarity mode, digital divide? The idea that those people with computers get richer and those people without computers get poorer because the computers are so powerful. The professor I know in Germany, Peter Brook, he describes the internet movement in 4 screens. The first screen is the movie screen, where just like now, a group of people come together and share an experience looking at a screen together. Though I realized today, walking around the market, that there's actually a 5th screen because I realized that the shadow puppets designed, invented here in Indonesia were actually the first screen. So maybe this is the 2nd screen. But the 4 screens I'll show you here, this is the first one. And the 2nd screen was the television. And the television allowed us somewhat of an interactive experience because I can click and change channels.